Good morning, Zimbabwe. Fellow Zimbabweans, following the address we made on 13 November 2017, which we believe our main broadcaster, Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, and the Herald were directed not to publicize the situation in our country, has moved to another level. Firstly, we wish to assure the nation that His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade R.G. Mugabe, and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed. We are only targeting criminals around him who are committing crimes that are causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice. As soon as we have accomplished our mission, we expect that the situation will return to normalcy. To the civil servants, as you are aware, there is a plan by the same individuals to influence the current purging which is taking place in the political sphere to the civil service. We are against that act of injustice, and we intend to protect everyone of you against that. To the judiciary, the measures underway are intended to ensure that, as an independent arm of the state, you are able to exercise your independent authority without fear of being obstructed, as has been the case with this group of individuals. To our members of parliament, your legislative role is of paramount importance for peace and stability in this country. And it is our desire that a dispensation is created that allows you to serve your respective political constituencies according to democratic tenets. To the generality of the people of Zimbabwe, we urge you to remain calm and limit unnecessary movement. However, we encourage those who are employed and those with essential business in the city to continue their normal activities as usual. Our wish is that you enjoy your rights and freedoms, and that we return our country to a dispensation that allows for investment, development, and prosperity that we all fought for, and for which many of our citizens paid the supreme sacrifice. To political parties, we urge you to discourage your members from engaging in violent behavior. To the youth, we call upon you to realize that the future of this country is yours. Do not be enticed with the dirty coins of silver. Be disciplined and remain committed to the ethos and the values of this great nation. To all churches and the religious organizations in Zimbabwe, we call upon you and your congregations to pray for our country and to preach the gospel of love, peace, unity, and development. To both our people and the world beyond our borders, we wish to make it abundantly clear that this is not a military takeover of government. What the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is doing is to pacify a degenerating political, social, and economic situation in our country, which, if not addressed, may result in a violent conflict. We call upon all the war veterans to play a positive role in ensuring peace stability, and unity in the country. To members of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, all leave is cancelled, and you are all to return to your barracks with immediate effect. To our respected traditional leaders, you are the custodians of our culture, customs, traditions, and heritage, and we request you to provide leadership and direction to your communities for the sake of unity and development in our country. To the other security services, we urge you to cooperate for the good of our country. Let it be clear that we intend to address the human security threats in our country. Therefore, any provocation will be met with an appropriate response.
Commander, Zimbabwe National Army, Acting Commander, Air Force of Zimbabwe, General Officers, and Senior Officers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I did not leave you members of the press welcome. Thank you. Let us begin by quoting the Constitution of this country, particularly the preamble which speaks of, and I quote, exalting and extolling the brave men and women who sacrificed their lives during the Chimurenga Umvikera and national liberation struggles, and honoring our forebears and compatriots who toiled for the progress of our country, unquote. It is with humility and a heavy heart that we come before you to pronounce the indisputable reality that there is instability in ZANU-PF today, and as a result, anxiety in the country at large. Zimbabwe's history is hinged on the ideals of the revolution dating to the first Chimurenga, where thousands of people perished. ZANU-PF is the political party that waged the second Chimurenga for our independence. The struggle in which many Zimbabweans, in one way or the other, sacrificed and contributed immensely for our liberation. Many of these gallant fighters still live on with the spirited hope of seeing a prosperous Zimbabwe, but also the hope of leaving behind inheritance and legacy for posterity. It is pertinent to restate that the Zimbabwe Defense Forces remain the major stockholder in respect to the gains of the liberation struggle. And when these are threatened, we are obliged to take corrective measures. Clearly, ZANU-PF, having mainly been the only party that has ruled this country since independence, it has become a household name to most Zimbabweans across political divide. Therefore, it is common cause that any instability within the party naturally impacts on their social, political, and economic lives. Accordingly, there is distress, trepidation, and despondency. within the nation. Our peace-loving people who have stood by their government and endured some of the most trying social and economic conditions ever experienced are extremely disturbed by what is happening within the ranks of the National Revolutionary Party. What is obtaining in the Revolutionary Party is a direct result of the machinations of counter-revolutionaries who have infiltrated the party and whose agenda is to destroy it from within. It is saddening to see our revolution being hijacked by agents of our erstwhile enemies, who are now at the brink of returning our country to foreign domination, against which so many of our people perished. The famous slogan espoused by His Excellency the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Head of State and Government and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and I quote, "Zimbabwe will never be a colony again," unquote, is being seriously challenged by counter-revolutionary infiltrators who are now effectively influencing the direction of the party. It is our strong and deeply considered position that if drastic action is not taken immediately, our beloved country, Zimbabwe, is definitely headed to becoming a neo-colony again. The current purging and cleansing process in ZANU-PF, which so far is targeting mostly members associated with our liberation history, is a serious cause of concern to us in the Defense Forces. As a result of squabbling within the ranks of ZANU-PF, there has been no meaningful development in the country for the past 5 years. The resultant economic impasse has ushered in more challenges to the Zimbabwean populace, such as cash shortages and rising commodity prices. Our revolutionary path is replete with conduct and rebellion by people who have attempted to destroy the revolution from within. The formation of Flores, the attempt to remove the late Comrade Tepo from his position as chairman at the Mumbai Bogus Congress in 1973. The Nari Baza Rebellion, the Baning Story Rebellion soon after the death of Comrade Tepo, the Vashandi 1 and 2, as well as the rebellion that led to the death of the late Zipra commander, Comrade Alfred Nikita Mangena. Among others are cases in point. Therefore, the current shenanigans by people who do not share the same liberation history of ZANU-PF party are not a surprise to us. But what is significant to us and the generality of Zimbabweans is to remember that all these rebellions were diffused by the military. But at no point did the military usurp power. We must remind those behind the current treacherous shenanigans that when it comes to matters of protecting our revolution, the military will not hesitate to step in. ZANU-PF's standing political virtues are a product of faithful adherence to the founding values, decorum, discipline, and revolutionary protocol in the ruling party. Party orders were strictly adhered to, and whatever differences existed, they were resolved amicably and in the ruling party's closet. Unfortunately, since the turn of 2015, ZANU-PF's traditional protocol and procedures have changed with a lot of gossiping, backbiting, and public chastisement being the order of the day. Indeed, the party is undoing its legacy built over the years. While our people may be persuaded to take what is going on in ZANU-PF as internal political matters in that party, the truth remains that ZANU-PF's conduct and behavior as a ruling party has a direct impact on the lives of every citizen. Hence, all of us, regardless of political affiliation, are affected by the party's manner of doing business. From a security point of view, we cannot ignore the experiences of countries such as Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and many others in our region, where minor political differences degenerate into serious conflict that has decimated the social, political, and economic security of ordinary people. Section 212 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe mandates the Zimbabwe Defense Forces to protect Zimbabwe, its people, its national security and interest, and its territorial integrity, and to uphold this Constitution. Among other security threats that are coming out of what is obtaining in ZANU-PF are the reckless utterances by politicians denigrating the military, which are causing despondence within the rank and file. Further, we note with concerns the attempts by some politicians to drive a wedge between the security services for their own selfish interests. This is unacceptable. We take great exception to this behavior. There is only one Commander-in-Chief, His Excellency the President, Head of State and Government, and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade Robert Gabriel Mugabe. The military is an institution whose roles cut across the wider spectrum of government support functions in the form of military aid to civil power and military aid to civil ministries, which are roles derived from defense instruments. Therefore, we want to state here and now that the history of our revolution cannot be rewritten by those who have not been part of it. Having said that, we strongly urge.
The situation is tense in the country.
There's nothing tense. Situation very well. It's only tense in the minds of mad people.
And about reports that the military plays a role in the succession issue in Zimbabwe. What's your comment?
That's absolutely nonsense. We keep our. I've already said in my statement, go to section 212. We are there to not only to defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, but we are the principal organ which will uphold the constitution of the country. Period.
The press conference for the war veterans later, 12 o'clock. Yeah.
It was a surprise. It was an overnight coup which has taken place through the military. And us as Zimbabweans, we had thought we were going to have a free and fair election next year, but overnight we have seen that the army has taken over. But we look forward that maybe it is going to be a short thing, then the people of Zimbabwe should decide for themselves which party to lead them.
Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Haxi Myers-Belkin, and these are the headlines. Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe accuses his recently fired number 2 of consulting witch doctors as part of efforts to topple him. Emmerson Mnangagwa saying he's been forced to flee to South Africa after receiving a barrage of death threats. We'll be crossing live to Harare. After UN handouts at a Ugandan refugee camp are delayed by 2 weeks, dozens of South Sudanese refugees are forced to return to their war-ravaged country in search of food. And we visit the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal, where assassinations and local politics go hand in hand. Hi again, and thank you very much for tuning in. Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has said that he fired his vice president because he'd been plotting to take his place. Mugabe has accused Emmerson Mnangagwa of asking witch doctors when Mugabe would die. Mnangagwa's allies, meanwhile, say that Zimbabwe's former number 2 has fled to South Africa amid a series of death threats. Grace Mugabe, who is now widely expected to take up the post of vice president, had previously called Mnangagwa a snake that must be hit on the head. Well, for more on this, we can cross live now to Harare to speak with journalist Oliver Matthews. Oliver, during the course of pro-Mugabe demonstrations today, we've been seeing huge banners supporting Grace Mugabe's likely appointment as Mnangagwa's replacement. Was Mugabe's vice president really plotting a coup, or is this just a nifty way of keeping things in the family? After all, Grace Mugabe is now well positioned to one day take over from her husband.
Yes, and in addition to the banners that were displayed, the First Lady was given a standing ovation by ruling party supporters, and there were numerous calls for her to be made Vice President. But of course, that'll only be confirmed at a special ruling party congress to be held next month. But to answer your question, the coup plot, for many in Zimbabwe, this is all a case of deja vu, because we saw similar accusations made against Mnangagwa's predecessor, as Vice President, Joyce Mujuru. She too was sacked, and that was 3 years ago. And Mugabe accused her of creating a separate center of power and of plotting to unseat him. But some analysts said that, in fact, she had become too popular, and that's why she was sacked. Grace Mugabe told a big church rally at the weekend that Mnangagwa also wanted to topple her husband from power, and that he'd wanted to do that for a long time. Of course, she's the president's much younger wife. She's in her 50s. And for a long time, she played almost no part in politics. She was involved in charity work. She was very much a family person. But then back in 2014, she suddenly moved onto Zimbabwe's political stage in a big way. She got a PhD. And since then, she's got elected to lead the ZANU-PF Women's League, which is a very powerful position. And the speculation has been for some time that she may actually want to be president. And last weekend we saw her asking publicly why that shouldn't be the case, why she shouldn't be president. Of course, it's not an ambition that Mnangagwa's supporters would be happy with, but he is for now out of the way. What we don't know yet is how many of those left in ZANU-PF also wanted to be president, or whether they have other party members in mind.
Now, in a statement attributed to Mnangagwa, he insists that he's always been loyal to the president, but that now, after this betrayal, he's determined to return to Zimbabwe to lead the country. Is he in any real position to mount a challenge to the Mugabes?
Well, Mnangagwa was certainly thought to command a lot of support within the military, but we don't know that for sure, and we don't know what that support looks like now. If he does have supporters in the military, especially among the top brass, they may well be removed from their positions. Mnangagwa's other key support base is the war veterans. Those are people who fought in the independence war in the 1970s. The war veterans issued a statement today saying that they've disowned Mugabe. A few years ago, that would have been very significant. The war veterans were a group that ZANU-PF relied on in previous elections, but their influence is waning now. The president has been careful in the meantime to cultivate two other powerful constituencies within his party, the youth and the women. And of course, as I've just said, Grace Mugabe heads the Women's League within ZANU-PF. So Mugabe is still in a very strong position within the ruling party. Could Mnangagwa really challenge him? It's not clear how, especially if Mnangagwa really is out of the country. As you said, he's been said to be in South Africa. Mugabe, though, still looks to be by far in the strongest position. But of course, we really don't know what Mnangagwa might be planning to do next.
Oliver Matthews in Harare, thank you very much indeed for that. Dozens of refugees from South Sudan who had been seeking shelter in Uganda have returned home, driven by hunger. The UN says that's because last month food distribution in refugee camps was delayed, meaning that tens of thousands of people got very little to eat in October. For some, the journey back home has been deadly. At least 8 refugees have been killed after returning to civil war-ravaged South Sudan. Clement Bonero has this report.
Oliver Wani fled war and poverty in South Sudan. Hunger drove him back home. Like tens of thousands of other refugees, he was living in this camp in northern Uganda. When the food ran out, he returned to his home country, only to find death on the way back.
We went to look for him, and we found out he was killed. His body was dumped on the road.
This camp in Palarinia houses about 180,000 refugees from South Sudan. Each refugee is supposed to get rice, beans, oil and salt every month. But last month, thousands went hungry after food delivery was delayed. The UN says that was because of limited supplies in Uganda. Desperate, dozens left the camp.
Some of the refugees may decide to return to their homes earlier than they are supposed to be. Our desire is that each and every refugee should return to their home country when there is peace. But if there is no support, it means we may lose lives instead of protecting lives.
The World Food Programme says it started giving cash to refugees so they can buy food during delays. Many, however, fear it won't be enough.
I can't feed my family, so I've decided to go back to South Sudan. I may get killed, but dying of hunger is too painful.
At least 8 refugees have died in recent weeks after returning to get food in South Sudan, where a bloody civil war has killed tens of thousands since 2013.
In the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal, local politics is dangerous business, with dozens of people killed in politically motivated shootings in recent years. With President Jacob Zuma stepping down as chief of the African National Congress in December, what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal is shining a harsh light on the divisions at the heart of the ruling party.
This accommodation for migrant workers is one of the most dangerous places in South Africa. Gleeblands in KwaZulu-Natal is home to several of the gunmen responsible for a slew of killings in the battle for control of the regional branch of the ruling ANC party that has claimed more than 90 victims since 2014.
We lost a lot of our friends here. As you can see, these holes here, R5, AK-47 had been used to us. I'm not telling you the hearsay. I'm telling something that I was present when it happened. The people that are hitmen here, they are being used by the politicians.
Tens of thousands of people live in the complex of 71 squalid dormitories. It's easy to recruit shady characters ready for illicit work from the residences. They're watched over by police who turn a blind eye.
And there's been so many complaints about corruption and collusion with hitmen by the local, involving the local police station and other certain individuals within the police force, and no proper investigation to stop that. So the hitmen thought they could just carry on doing what they do best, and because of the economic conditions, it makes it very easy to hire a hitman. So it's proliferated. And now it's really sort of out of control.
Some members of the ANC accept the party's share of the blame for the mounting bloodshed. but few have acted to stop the hitmen or to protect their targets.
We cannot continue with this kind of culture. It's a counter-revolutionary culture. Killing is a crime even in the Bible. So we cannot tolerate it. We should not tolerate it. All of us must take that decision that I'm going to be part of finding a solution.
With the leadership of the ANC in the balance, the party is more divided than ever between Cyril Ramaphosa, the deputy president, and the president's former wife, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who comes from the region. The bloodshed in the state looks set to continue for the foreseeable future.
Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Eye on Africa. There's more world news coming up after the break.
All right, 10 minutes before we say goodbye as we continue the rolling coverage of the situation in Zimbabwe, the latest reports indicating that President Robert Mugabe and his family members are under house arrest. Let's just take a look at, of course, his political career.
Robert Mugabe was born on the 21st of February 1924. His birthplace was the rural Jesuit mission of Kutama at Zimba, about 90 kilometers west of Harare. Mugabe qualified as a teacher at the age of 17. He obtained the first of his many degrees from Fort Hare and UNISA in South Africa. After attending the late Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-African Congress in 1958, Mugabe taught for 2 years in Ghana. That's also where he met his first wife, the late Sally Hayfron. Back home, Mugabe rose to prominence as Secretary General of the Zimbabwe African National Union, or ZANU. The white minority government of the late Ian Smith arrested several liberation leaders in the early 1960s. Robert Mugabe was jailed for treason between 1964 and 1974. On his release, he joined Zimbabwe's freedom fighters in Mozambique. British-mediated negotiations at Lancaster House in London in 1979 led to a peace agreement and new constitution which guaranteed minority rights. They culminated in elections for independent Zimbabwe in early 1980. ZANU emerged victorious and Robert Mugabe became Zimbabwe's first prime minister. President Mugabe was one of the world's longest ruling leaders. He led Zimbabwe from the 18th April 1980 when Rhodesia gained independence from Britain. He initially offered an olive branch to the white minority and introduced much-needed social reforms. Zimbabwe's new leader was feted globally for his conciliatory stance towards his former enemies. A comprehensive social program was rolled out in Zimbabwe. It included free primary education and health care, as well as the expansion of roads, electricity, and telephone network. But it was also a time of tragedy. In 1982, Joshua Nkomo and his Zimbabwe African People's Union, or ZAPU, were accused of plotting a coup d'etat. Arms caches were found in Nkomo's stronghold of Matabeleland. Many suspected apartheid South Africa of fueling the ZAPU-ZANU rift. Mugabe unleashed his North Korean-trained 5th Brigade in Operation Kukurahundi or Cleansing Rain. Thousands of Nkomo supporters and alleged dissidents were killed. Didimus Mutasa was a Mugabe loyalist. Robert Mugabe's reconciliatory efforts were challenged in 1985 when several white voters returned to Smith's Republican Front to Parliament. Following the so-called dissident period, ZANU and ZAPU signed a unity accord in 1987. It gave birth to ZANU-PF, established one-party rule in Zimbabwe, and resulted in Robert Mugabe becoming executive president with additional powers. In the early 1990s, Zimbabwe adopted the World Bank Structural Adjustment Program to modernize its economy. It entailed conditional funding for development. Within 5 years, though, the country faced mounting debt. In the late 1990s, Mugabe bowed to pressure from former freedom fighters to pay them millions, including monthly pensions.
You will be paid eventually. There is no reason for strikes. It's just that some don't appreciate that they have a government that has given them land, jobs, and well-being. They don't want to understand that we too, while fighting for our independence, worked for little monetary reward.
The deployment of about 40,000 Zimbabwean soldiers to the DRC drained Zimbabwe's coffers. It also experienced its most violent food droughts following price increases, especially for mealie. All of this led to an emergence of opposition movement for democratic change. The tightly contested March 2008 presidential and parliamentary elections marked a turning point in Zimbabwe's political landscape. Even though Mugabe remained president after 2 rounds of voting, he was forced into a SADC-facilitated power-sharing government with the MDC factions of Morgan Tsvangirai and Dr. Arthur Mutambara. But Mugabe's leadership was tarnished from the early 1980s by the Matabeleland massacres, land invasions of white-owned commercial farms, and Zimbabwe's subsequent economic collapse.
We have said, even as we acquire our land, we shall not deprive the white farmers of land completely. Every one of them is entitled to at least 1 farm, but they would want to continue to have more than 1 farm. More than 1 farm indeed. 15, 20, 35 farms, 1 person. These are not figures I am just getting out of my mind. They are real figures. So no farmer is being left without land.
The land invasions plunged Zimbabwe economy into free-for-all. The agricultural sector died. The Bretton Woods institutions stopped lending money to Zimbabwe when it couldn't honor its financial obligations.
The International Monetary Fund has never been a fund for the poor peasants seeking sustainable development. Even the United Nations, a body that is supposed to give us equal voices, remains unreformed.
All right, that's President Robert Mugabe. Just a little bit of a look at his career, political career. Well, that's where we'll leave it for today.
Good morning, Zimbabwe. Fellow Zimbabweans, following the address we made on 13 November 2017, which we believe our main broadcaster, Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, and the Herald were directed not to publicize the situation in our country, has moved to another level. Firstly, we wish to assure the nation that His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade R.G. Mugabe, and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed. We are only targeting criminals around him who are committing crimes that are causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice. As soon as we have accomplished our mission, we expect that the situation will return to normalcy. To the civil servants, as you are aware, there is a plan by the same individuals to influence the current purging which is taking place in the political sphere. To the civil service, we are against that act of injustice, and we intend to protect everyone of you against that. To the judiciary, the measures underway are intended to ensure that, as an independent arm of the state, you are able to exercise your independent authority without fear of being obstructed, as has been the case with this group of individuals. To our members of parliament, Your legislative role is of paramount importance for peace and stability in this country. And it is our desire that a dispensation is created that allows you to serve your respective political constituencies according to democratic tenets. To the generality of the people of Zimbabwe, we urge you to remain calm and limit unnecessary movement. However, we encourage those who are employed and those with essential business in the city to continue their normal activities as usual. Our wish is that you enjoy your rights and freedoms, and that we return our country to a dispensation that allows for investment, development, and prosperity that we all fought for and for which many of our citizens paid the supreme sacrifice. To political parties, we urge you to discourage your members from engaging in violent behavior. To the youth, we call upon you to realize that the future of this country is yours. Do not be enticed with the dirty coins of silver. Be disciplined and remain committed to the ethos and the values of this great nation. To all churches and the religious organizations in Zimbabwe, we call upon you and your congregations to pray for our country and to preach the gospel of love, peace, unity, and development. To both our people and the world beyond our borders, we wish to make it abundantly clear that this is not a military takeover of government. What the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is doing is to pacify a degenerating political, social, and economic situation in our country, which, if not addressed, may result in a violent conflict. We call upon all the war veterans to play a positive role in ensuring peace, stability, and unity in the country. To members of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, all leave is cancelled, and you are all to return to your barracks with immediate effect. To our respected traditional leaders, you are the custodians of our culture, customs, traditions, and heritage, and we request you to provide leadership and direction to your communities for the sake of unity and development in our country. To the other security services, we urge you to cooperate for the good of our country. Let it be clear that we intend to address the human security threats in our country. Therefore, any provocation will be met with an appropriate response.
Mass shooting after yesterday's mass shooting. Tomorrow. Today, some stunning world news, actually. The Zimbabwean military has taken over control of the country from longtime dictator President Robert Mugabe, and he, along with his wife, are reportedly under house arrest. However, the term coup or the term military takeover is sort of being rejected by the military itself. Television and radio announcements from the military said, this is not a military takeover, which is kind of funny because when the military takes control of the airwaves in order to tell you anything, you sort of think of it as a military takeover. But there's actually a lot of legal significance, or at least PR significance, in saying it is not a coup in terms of how this takeover, I don't even know what other word to use, is going to be seen internationally. And we'll talk about those implications. But practically speaking, there's every indication that this is a coup. It looks like a coup. It sounds like a coup, and it definitely smells like a coup. Military vehicles all over the city of Harare, the army taking over a TV station, uniformed members of the military issuing statements to the country, and the international legitimacy of this. You know, if you say this is a coup, it sounds very anti-progressive, rightly so. But really the question as to whether this is or isn't a military coup is going to be based on what comes next, right? Will there be democratic elections next year as presumably scheduled to take place? And the timing of it is interesting. It's probably more than interesting. I'm sort of struggling for the right word because Robert Mugabe is 93 years old. He has been president since 1987 in Zimbabwe. He, before being president for 7 years, was the prime minister from 1980 to 1987. So it's easy to say, well, listen, taking him out of power at age 93, it's not meaningless, but he's pretty frail now, right? Like what really is the meaning of saying, hey, we waited 37 years and now we've taken him out of power? But really the question is what comes next, right? When dictators come to the ends of their lives, what happens next is what really matters. And there's been the possibility discussed that his wife, Grace Mugabe, who's much younger than him, 52 years old, which makes her 41 years younger than Robert Mugabe, she was considered maybe set to take over for him. But they're both now in military custody and reportedly safe under house arrest. There are Mugabe defenders who rightly point out, wait, he's not really the bad guy that he's been made out to be. He took the country away from white minority rule as prime minister in 1980. But the problem is that after doing that in 1980 as prime minister, he became this brutal suppressor of dissent of any kind, made decisions that led to just astronomical inflation, more and more poverty. And the political question now is, does Mugabe say, I'm stepping down, which is what the military will presumably try to get him to do? He's on house arrest, right? But actually getting him to relinquish the presidency is what would need to happen to allow an acting president to take control, for example. Now, the upside is that so far, this all appears to have happened without violence. Early reports so far, this is in its very early stages, but Mugabe is reportedly, as I said, already safe and under house arrest. Bloodshed, common maybe is an overstatement, but not that rare when it comes to these situations. The downside, or the possible downside, is that anytime you have a military removing a dictator from power, you have the possibility that the replacement can end up being just as bad or even worse. And we have a number of examples of that we've talked about on the program over the last many years. And we'll have to see what happens with that. I saw some rumblings of, could North Korea be next? Might the North Korean military do this to Kim Jong-un? I don't think it's likely. I mean, there's a totally different power structure in North Korea, drastically different circumstances in North Korea. And yes, there are two dictators in Zimbabwe and in North Korea, but that's more or less where the similarities end. So I have not I've never expected, and I don't remember if producer Lewis ever thought that you might see a military coup in North Korea. I've never expected it, and I still don't, and we'll follow the Zimbabwe story, but I don't think that it means anything about what we might expect to see in North Korea. I think the similarities end at there's two dictators in these two countries. The video you just finished watching was made possible by you through the membership program. You can sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. We are viewer-supported independent media. You can use the coupon code IVOTED17 for a 40% discount off of your membership.